not engaged in homosexual activities, and we can get along without hurting or fighting each other. And they still get the best jobs. They get white shirts, we get the blue shirts. They get in line first, they get the commissary first. The same joogie boogie, that you Frederick Douglas and everybody been fighting for the last 100, 200 years is still going on, and it's more prevalent now in prison than it is out here.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's crazy. That's deep.
Yeah.
Mr. Parker.
Yeah. I think as I listen to Roach's story of his life and the transformation of the things that he encountered, I noticed that there's a noticeable difference in the contents of lifestyles. And this is one of the first times I really heard the brother's story. Out of all the years, I've heard bits and pieces, but now to hear it placed together was a very interesting perspective. And it makes me take a second look at my own life story in the contents of, I came up in a structured household to a degree. Mother, father, I have a brother and a sister that was basically there, and they primarily owned property in the district. My father was from originally Norfolk, Virginia, my mother from Saluda, South Carolina. Perfect match to a large degree in the contents of culture, both from the South and both understanding what had to be done in order to accomplish. Time passed and they separated, and I think that separation at a critical time in our particular lives, basically my father leaving and my mother being the responsible person to retain the structure, and us being in the streets or observing the streets. We came out of the household and began to become excited about what was occurring in the streets around us.
What was exciting about the streets?
The exciting components about the streets was the individuals that we saw hanging on the street corners involved in gangs, individuals that was going contrary to the structures that would retain the behavior pattern in the District of Columbia, especially young brothers. And by virtue of seeing what was occurring and having a small fire to want to be a part of something that was moving, we began to relate to what you would say the other side of the fence. And upon relating to the other side of the fence, we got hooked into that particular lifestyle. My mother did not have the ability to retain two young black men that basically had the spirit of going into the streets, and therefore we took on a whole lifestyle. We began to become partners, me and my brother, in regards to robbery. We basically began with small little robberies in the contents of people in grocery stores, and then later elevated to banks and rigs trucks. That became the elevation for what we saw, because our perspective was, after seeing how things were, so if we was going to rob, let's rob something that's going to be substantial.
Right.
There you go.
We would be able to get the dollars that would help to sustain the dreams that we were seeing.
If
We're gonna do it big.
One thing I noticed that, just as somebody, as an outsider that lives here now, but I see it in the culture, like it's a culture in DC of bank robbers.
Yeah. And if I had brought my other book in, you would see I had about two to three pages, basically of the charges that I had obtained pertaining to bank robberies. I was convicted of two of them. The first conviction I received 15 to 45 years at the age of 19. That was my first conviction, no adult convictions or anything. And the second one I received 30 years.
So let me ask you, not to cut you off, let me ask you this. When you've been sentenced to 20 to 40 years, do you remember your first thought, what that first thought was when you sit in front of that judge and he's...
Yeah.
I think for me, it was basically the tone had been set in the contents of what to expect once you were caught.
Okay.
Because the environment was producing individuals with those type of sentences.
Okay.
So we just felt in accordance
Okay.
to the expectation of getting 15 to 45 years of life in prison.
Okay.
The pendulum swung when they started seeing black men running into banks, young black men running into banks. And I can never forget a cartoon that was in the Washington Post where you had Hoover the bank being robbed, his bank being robbed, and his hands is up in the air, you know, which indicate the massive amount of banks.
Control.
Yeah,
He couldn't stop it.
yeah, he couldn't stop it, you know. And it was also during the time of the 60s where you had this country was at a major distress, where you had the Minutemen that was blowing up the Capitol, and you had the Panthers that was basically doing their thing. Then you had the riots that was occurring. So the country was in a very unrest situation. Then you had the inner city robbing banks. So at that point in time, it seemed like we was hitting at the main structure of what this country was. And in turn, they had to set an example, regardless of the first conviction of what. They was going to break this mold pertaining to this lifestyle that was being created by young black men. You know, so
you got your first bid at 19. What time? When did you get released, and when did you do your second bid?
Well, you know, I was blessed. I was blessed in the senses, and one would say, "Blessed? How the hell could you call 15 to 45 years a blessing?" You know,
It ain't life.
no, it
It's
ain't.
a number.
Yeah, it's an interesting number, but you know, when I went in, I was married. You know,
At 19.
at 19, I had a good wife. You know, and I got shot in the back. You know, as I made mention of.
By the police.
Running from the police. You know, and on that note, my brother got shot as well in the back by the police. They came to the house with a warrant for him, and he took off running. They shot him in his back, come to find out that the warrant wasn't even for him. Now he's paralyzed now from neck down.
Wow.
You know? And I had a son, as you know, as I mentioned last night, that was killed. And as you guys talked about Rare Essence, my son, they just put a mirror of my son in the 4200 block of Martin Luther King Avenue. Rapping Rodney was his name, and he was. They said that he was the next biggest rapper to come out of Washington D.C. compared to Biggie Small. You know, so but you know, went to Lawton. You know, and Lawton was extraordinary. And
Lawton at the time, that was the prison for
that
DC.
was the prison for D.C.
Well, the jail.
It was, you know, the thing, and I think what you saw last night on that film was the product of Lawton Reformatory fast forward.
Right.
Because what occurred in Lawton Reformatory is that we had a guy that came to Lawton that was born in Atlanta, Georgia, and him and Martin Luther King was very close friends from what I'm told. Martin went on to do civil rights, and John O. Boone went on to do human rights, going into the prison system. You know, and he came to Lawton, and his concept was that any person that came in contact with his community-based program concept would never go back to jail again. This was this guy. And on any given time, you would see almost 300 to 400 inmates in the streets of the District of Columbia, performing all types of services. You know, from going to school, from having job training, working and went in the federal government. You know, and like Roach Brown, creating plays where he took almost let him go into an extraordinary career. You know, that was unbelievable. And to some degree, I said, this man, they should have called him, Christian him like Mother Teresa. And my perspective for that is that he basically went out to prison for almost 1,000 times with guys that had from 10 years to life and never had not one escape. You know, and giving individuals an opportunity to be able to go out and to transform their lives.
Yeah, that's
I mean, can you imagine an inmate that had the spirit to be able to let men out of prison?
Yeah.
And he was responsible for their behavior. And they came back over 1,000 times.
So that brings me to my next question. So what type of talents did you incur from the black man while you was in prison? You know what I mean?
You know, brother, I was blessed because I was placed into an environment where you had the choice. You could eat back like a damn fool and follow all the characteristics, dope, sissy, whatever, you know, and be a part of that lifestyle, or you could subscribe to the intellectual brothers.
Okay.
You know, and there you had a wealth of intellectualness that was able to share it and wanted to share it with the younger brothers. and I began to absorb from some of the great ones there, Avon Alexander, Dookie Moore, you know, individuals that sold the 14th Street Bridge to the senator of Mississippi, you know, Avon Alexander, Johnny Edwards. I mean, you know, the talent that was there, but in incorporating that with a John Boone that was willing to let inmates go out. And I went out into the number of programs going to school and subscribing and understood what community was and what I could do for a community and the relationship.
When
of
was that
community.
moment when you went out there and you were like, the light just clicked? Like, this is what I want to do.
You know what, brother? It didn't happen on the first time
Okay.
around. You know, no, it was it was a slow transformation. You know, I still had some desires in me that I wanted to accomplish, some things I wanted to do to get me some fast dollars. You know, so that was still there, but I was in a learning mode.
Okay.
You know, and that was the process.
Right.
You know, the learning mode that I was in. But man, Lawton Reformatory produced some of the most ingenious. Donald Streeter, who was an inmate who later went on to become a parole officer.